Our second message today comes from John chapter 20. I invite you now to listen for these words of the Lord. When it was evening on that day, the first day of the week, and the doors were locked where the disciples were for fear of the Jews, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." After he said this, he showed them his hands and his side. Then the disciples rejoiced when they saw the Lord. And Jesus said to them again, "Peace be with you. As the Father has sent me, so I send you." When he had said this, he breathed on them and said to them, "Receive the Holy Spirit. If you forgive the sins of any, they are forgiven them. If you retain the sins of any, they are retained." But Thomas, who was called the twin, one of the 12, was not with them when Jesus came. So the other disciples told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he said to them, "Unless I see the marks of the nails in his hands, and put my finger in the mark of the nails, and my hand in his side, I will not believe." A week later, his disciples were again in the house, and Thomas was with them. Although the doors were shut, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here and see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it in my side. Do not doubt, but believe." Thomas answered him, "My Lord and my God." Jesus said to him, "Have you believed because you have seen me? Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have come to believe." Now Jesus did many other signs in the presence of his disciples that are not written in this book. But these are written so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that through believing you may have life in his name. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You know, we call Thomas Doubting Thomas, but what of the other disciples who, upon hearing Mary's message that the Lord had risen, did not believe her and ran as quickly as they could to see for themselves, to see so that they might believe? I think Thomas gets a bad rep, and honestly, he gets it just for being human. We are curious. We need to learn through experience and sometimes find out the hard way that quite often we can't trust the word of others because we have been played before and we have been disappointed. Now, in our text today, Jesus shows up in a room that was locked. He was there. He is corporeal. How did he get in? We have no idea. All we know is that Jesus is there and we can see him, we can touch him, we can hear him, just as though he had never died. And honestly, it is a wonder, since Thomas looked enough like Jesus to be called the twin, that the other disciples didn't question Jesus more themselves. You see, if Thomas is the only one who's missing from the room, and someone who looks just like Thomas shows up, wouldn't you be asking, "Hey, aren't you just Thomas in some makeup? Come on, dude, this isn't funny." But I'm wondering if one of them didn't also need to poke their hands into Jesus's palms, just to be sure of themselves. Now, all is confirmed, though, when Jesus breathes the Spirit on them, and just like in the Pentecost story to come, Jesus leaves them with his Spirit, and he charges them to go out and give his peace to the world, just as God had sent him. And in this way, he bookends the Eastertide time. So here we are after the resurrection, and boom, we get a mini Pentecost. And at the end of 50 days, what do we call it? Pentecost. Same thing happening here. He begins and ends with the breath of the Spirit. Now let's get back to Thomas. This strange appearance and Thomas's timely absence. Now, as I mentioned, Thomas has it rough. All of us are calling him by his one singular moment of doubt. Imagine making one mistake, and for the rest of your life and beyond it, you are known forever for that mistake. Now, poor Thomas's only true crime was not being there when Jesus first came. He was left out, and perhaps he felt as though maybe they had all shared some grand hallucination, or maybe they were pulling one over on him. I mean, who knows? Maybe Jesus had to return a second time, not only for Thomas's sake, but for the rest of them to show that, in fact, they were both standing there at the exact same time. This was indeed Jesus. But this is all conjecture. And there's a lot of room in today's story for doubt, for assumption, for tricks and theories. And we were not there, just as Thomas was not there the first time. And if it was hard for Thomas to believe, we don't actually know what happened. And furthermore, as Christians, how do we address the need for doubt and wonder in our faith? If Thomas had doubt, surely we carry doubts. There's no shame in that. When I was about 14 years old, I was a part of my youth group at my home church, and we took this whirlwind trip out to Magic Mountain. It's this Six Flags just north of LA. Now, we're from Scottsdale, Arizona, so we all got in the car and we drove all the way through the night, and we get to Denny's in the morning. And I remember we were all sitting around the table, and when we finished our meal, I figured, oh no, we have to get in the van for one more hour. I'm going to book it to the restroom. So I go to the bathroom, and when I come back, the whole group is whispering. And they all got up and they said, hurry, come on, we gotta go, we gotta get in the van now. And I was confused. I said, haven't we paid the bill? And they said, come on, just go, we're gonna get in the car, come on, we're not paying. And so I asked the question again loudly, have we not paid? And they started dragging me out to the van, all 95 pounds of me, and I'm squirming, trying to fight them, get back in the restaurant, because I don't want to be a criminal. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, the whole youth group, we're going to be in jail. They're going to have to bail us out. It's going to be a problem. And we get all the way to the van, and the whole group stops. And they just bust out laughing. I'm on the verge of tears, okay? I was the butt of the joke. And I have been ever since. But I have never gone to the bathroom again right before the bill comes. I will wait until I see that the credit card has been given, and then I will go. Every single time, well into my adulthood. So yes, I have been scarred. Fool me once, ha! All right? You're not going to fool me a second time. Now, perhaps this was not Thomas's first time being part of or witnessing a joke by the other disciples. Keep in mind, these were all very young men, okay? We're talking men in their 20s, early 30s, and they're all traveling together all the time. I'm sure that there were plenty of jokes, plenty of laughs, and lots of ridiculousness, okay? So traditionally, the Sunday after Easter is called Holy Humor Sunday. And this tradition was started by the early Greek churches, and it's rooted in the musings of early church theologians such as Augustine, Gregory of Nyssa, and John Chrysostom. That God played a practical joke on the devil by raising Jesus from the dead. Risus Paschalis, that means the Easter laugh. And the early theologians called it this, and later it got transformed to be called Bright Sunday or Holy Humor Sunday. And churches of all denominations have embraced the tradition, and practical jokes are played on the pastor, on the congregants. Anybody who steps on a church property can become a part of any of these jokes. Laughter releases tension, and it brings people together. Mentors in my past have told me that when times get tough, when the room gets awkward, just resort to humor, and it'll help everything be a little bit better. Now, in my case, I've had to learn to do it correctly. I'm not good at jokes, okay? I was too serious as a child. Here we are. I'm sorry. But I'm hoping that this is something we can embrace next year. I've already spoken to our resident comedian, Wasim. Maybe we can have some jokes next year. So, I wonder, though, if Thomas found himself in a similar situation. Maybe he, too, was always a little too serious as a child. Maybe the other disciples thought it was fun to pick on Thomas, and so naturally he comes back in the room, and what else would he think? After all, this is a time to party. This is the time that Jesus said he would return. He said, I will be back in 3 days. Wait up for me, okay, I'm coming. And what does he do? The sun rises on that third day, and boom, here he is. He's back with us with the theatrical applause of that stone rolled away, and everybody's shocked because what did they all do? They doubted. Thomas was not the only one. But by golly, what a surprise. We should all be partying. Our very lives have just been won. Now, poor Thomas, he was late to the party, marked the odd man out. And though he believed in Jesus, he believed he would return, he was uncertain that what his friends were actually telling him was true. Heck, I was on a call just last week with a pastor friend of mine. She is a pastor down in Houston. And she was very frustrated because the property committee was ordering new hardware for the preschool office door. And they called her up and they asked her, hey, what finish are the hinges on the door? Are they brass, silver, brushed nickel? What finish are they? And she goes down, she looks at the door, she's still on the phone, and she says, these are brass hinges. And they say, okay, well, I think we're going to come down there and just make sure for ourselves. So they all go, all the property committee, and they stare at the hinge, and yes, it is indeed brass. If we can't believe each other on simple things like brass hinges, how on earth can we 2,000 years later believe in the resurrection of the Messiah? Jesus understood that Thomas needed help. What happened in his absence, it was not a plot, it was not a hallucination, not a joke, it was not a lie, and it wasn't a mistake either. Jesus, he had this special way of connecting with people. And he knew that one size didn't fit all, so he met each person where they were in their faith journeys and in their life. And for Thomas, he gave to him what he gave all the other disciples, but in addition to that, he gave him the opportunity to touch and to feel, because that's what he needed. Then he expected all of them, now that they were all on the same page, to go out and bring his peace to the world, bring his gospel to the world in the very same way that he himself had been sent. Thanks, Jesus. That's easy, isn't it? Yeah, go out there, spread the good news. Everybody's gonna believe you. Make it easy on us, why don't you? Now, you may recall last week in the sermon, I said to you, I can preach to you, I can read the Bible to you, heck, I can even sell it to you, but I cannot make you believe the good news. And that's a good thing, my friends, because if there were that much pressure on the sermon on a Sunday morning, I don't think anybody could stand up here and do this. So thank God that that is not our sole method of believing. Faith is nurtured by so much more. You all know this. It's nurtured by things that cannot always be expressed in words. Things like experience, love, kindness, security. And they help us to be able to just be human, to wonder, to question, to find our own way to faith in this world, the faith that we uniquely hold. Spirituality is practiced when we feel safe enough to be vulnerable, to be influenced by the beyond, whatever we might call that, by God. And when we do spirituality together, that is called religion. Faith is a very personal expression of spirituality. And spirituality is experienced in very personal and unique ways, and it is understood on different levels as we experience and live our life journeys. And Jesus knows this. So he gave Thomas the space to wonder, to experience. He stretched out his hands and he showed Thomas his side, and he invites Thomas even to touch him. But you see, Thomas also already had faith. And here Jesus honored his curiosity and strengthened his faith through that opportunity in a safe environment. This is what the church is called to do. This is what Jesus asks us to do. You see, the church is called to be an authentic relationship, to be human together before God. When we are allowed to make mistakes, to fail, to seek, to wonder within the safety of other people who truly and honestly care for us, that is fertile ground. That is where we can grow and thrive and learn and laugh together. So if society has become largely lonely and competitive and harsh, and the world is made of plastic and artificial imagery and false news reports, why aren't people flocking into the church? Why isn't every seat in here filled? People say they're looking for that authentic sense of peace. Why, in a society that craves something real and authentic, is the church dying? People are seeking the type of peace that God gives, but they do not know where to turn. And so they find things like meditation apps, yoga groups, gardening even, and they instill it with meaning that helps them to find the calm in the chaos of life. You see, it's not so much about being saved as it is about being at ease in a world that pressures you to always be looking over your shoulder. And there's nothing wrong with that. But when did church stop being known for being God's place of peace and grace? When did it stop being that safe place? Perhaps it's when the church stopped being an authentic and vulnerable community of the broken and the spiritual, and it became instead a guarded and fearful place, just as the world around it. And maybe it was when our own actions betrayed the peace of God, and our welcome became reserved and exclusive. And I'm not speaking just of Round Rock Presbyterian Church, I'm speaking of the church as a whole. This is happening all over the world. Maybe it was when we fell on our own understanding and we left God to the people of yesteryear. God isn't working fast enough to save us from ourselves, so the answer must be elsewhere. Perhaps it's in a self-help book or in the smile of a rich man with a nice-sounding promise. I was reading an article published recently in the Presbyterian Outlook called Anxiety, Politics, and the Lost Mysticism of the Church. And there was a line in it that stood out to me. It read, "Since the church hasn't offered a more beautiful, more expansive, gospel-centered story, people have replaced their faith in God with faith in a candidate or political party. Politics is our new God, or at least one of our new gods. And in November, we elect our high priest." That's really bold, but it's not an entirely untrue statement. The church has taken a route that points more to ourselves and our doing than to God's lately. And this is largely due to a shift in our cultural experience of enchantment. Without enchantment, we become more secular. We lean our faith and understanding into things that we can see and we can touch. And yet we crave direction from some higher power. And so we make the things that we can see and we can touch into that higher power. And essentially, we quiet the voice within us that yearns for something deeper, rooted in the fibrous connections of our universe. Christianity has either resorted to social action as a means of salvation or personal righteousness. These are things that we do. These are not things that we experience that are done to us. They emphasize our own choices and our own actions, and they belittle the need for God's presence and influence. People are anxious. Nobody trusts anyone anymore. We're all looking over our shoulders or feeling left out or lied to. I was surprised on April 1st, April Fool's Day, to see how many people for the first time were actually skeptical about what they were reading on the internet. That should be every day. And all of this, it causes this tension to build, this resentment to take root, and our walls go up and laughter dies. And we even see, and we do not believe because we have been tricked before. So how do we, as the church, help our own faith? How do we address the hurt and fear that we feel as Christians? We don't. God does. God is reaching out to us, but we struggle with vulnerability and authenticity in moments of failure and raw curiosity and grace. And man, those things are hard. We don't like to feel vulnerable. We don't like to fail. But how else will we learn and grow? It is not easy to just be human, to just exist, to allow ourselves to need and to be helped and to be loved. We've been hurt and we've been tricked before. We've been scarred. And guarding ourselves feels safer and more promising. But when we each come broken and complicated before God, God meets us where we are and helps us to see in order that we might believe, each through our own lenses. And then God asks us to turn and give that same grace and that same peace that we have been offered to one another and to all whom we meet, just as Jesus has been sent. But to get there, we first must allow ourselves to be open. We each have a faith as unique as our fingerprints, and that makes every single church community just as unique as all the unique faiths that build it as well. And when we come together and allow one another to just be human, to just question, to fail, to break, to build together, to explore and investigate new things, there's a name for that: grace. The church is supposed to be a grace space, a place that allows us to feel safe together no matter how we come. And when we feel safe together through a little kindness and a whole lot of love, we can begin to laugh together and to find that peace of God that shines through the strongest there in healthy and loving relationships, because we are open to being molded in God's love and with one another. By this, we do not need to see to believe, but only to feel. And with God's peace showered upon us and fostered within this loving community, that feeling can be felt by all, welcomed and accepted and valued as we are, broken and questioning and curious, human, and in deep need of God. That is something real. That is something beautiful and true and so needed. That is what we call sacred. That can be found here. Friends, let us pray. Holy and loving God, we give you thanks that your Son, as promised, came back to us and for us, and met us each as we needed to be met. In our disbelief, he allowed us time and gave us a safe space to wonder and explore. Help us to do this for one another and to be a safe haven in a world that is otherwise. Amen.